My girlfriend demanded I remove every photo of my dead wife before moving and my kids begged me not to. At 3 a.m. I found my daughter in the hallway holding her mom's photo from the garage. My daughter came home from school, walked into the living room, looked at the walls where her mother's photographs had hung for 3 years, and said one sentence. She said, "You took mom down." Not a question. A verdict. She was 12 years old and she looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before and have not been able to stop seeing since, and then she walked to her room and closed the door and did not come out for dinner. I stood in the living room with the bare walls and the smell of Nicole's candle and the sound of my daughter's door closing, and I understood, in the specific way you understand things when it is already too late to do anything, with the understanding that I had just done something to my child that I could not undo. I had taken her mother off the walls. I had done it that morning while she was at school so I would not have to watch her face while I did it. I had done it because my girlfriend had asked me to. And my 12-year-old daughter had come home and identified it in 4 words before she even put her bag down. Rachel died 3 years before that afternoon. Cancer. She was 38 and she was the kind of person whose absence reshapes the entire landscape of everything around it, not just for me but for Lily, who was 11 when she lost her, and for Evan, who was 9. We had assembled a life after, the 3 of us, imperfect and fragile and entirely built around keeping Rachel real. The photographs were how we kept her real. 14 of them, chosen by the children themselves, arranged by them on the walls of the only home they had ever known. Lily had picked the wedding photo. Evan had picked the hospital photo where Rachel was holding him an hour after he was born. They had placed them together, 3 months after Rachel died, with the specific seriousness of children performing an act they understood mattered. I had watched them do it and understood that what they were doing was not decorating. It was anchoring. I met Nicole 16 months after Rachel died. She was warm and present and interested in me, and I had been alone for long enough that warmth felt like rescue. We dated for 7 months before I introduced her to the children. The introduction was careful, managed, by the book. Lily was polite with the specific politeness of a child doing something difficult. Evan was curious. Nicole was kind to both of them. I held on to the kindness. The first time the photographs came up, Nicole did not say remove them. She said, standing in the living room on a Sunday afternoon, looking at the wall above the television, "She's very present here, isn't she?" I said Rachel was the children's mother and always would be. Nicole said she understood that. She said it with a smile that did not reach her eyes, and then she asked if I wanted coffee. I told myself the comment was understandable. I told myself any person might feel something standing in the home of someone's late wife. I moved past it. The second time was 3 months later. Nicole and I were talking about the future and she said she had been thinking about what it would look like when she moved in. She said she wanted it to feel like a shared home, not like she was a guest in someone else's house. I said I understood. She said she needed the space to feel like it belonged to all of us, to the people who were actually there. I heard the words. I did not yet hear what they meant. The third time she said it directly. We were in my kitchen and she put her glass down and she looked at me and said, "I need the photographs to come down before I move in." Just like that. Not "I feel uncomfortable" or "I wonder if we could discuss." A need. A condition. A line in the sand delivered in the voice of someone who had decided they were not asking anymore. I said, "Those photographs are for my children." She said she understood that. She said she was not asking forever, just for a transition period, just while they all adjusted to the new arrangement. She said the children would adjust faster than I feared. She said she had done research. She said blended family experts recommended creating neutral spaces. She said all of this with the fluency of someone who had prepared the argument, who had thought about it long enough to have an answer for every objection, and I sat across from her and felt the specific sensation of being managed and told myself I was being unreasonable. I told Lily about the plan the evening before I did it. That was my first cowardice. Not the deciding. The telling. I sat Lily down at the kitchen table and I told her that when Nicole moved in we were going to rearrange some things, including moving the photographs to a different location for a while, and that this was a normal part of blended families adjusting and that it would not be permanent. Lily looked at me across the table and said, "You're taking mom down." I said I was temporarily relocating the photographs. She said, "While Nicole lives here." I said it was a transition. She said, "No. Just that. No." Not with anger, which would have been easier. With absolute certainty. She said, "Dad. No." And then Evan, who had been sitting quietly at the other end of the table, said, "Please don't." 2 words. Please don't. He said it in the voice of a 9-year-old who does not have more than 2 words for what he is feeling but needs those 2 words to be enough. I told them it was going to be okay. I did it the next morning while they were at school. I took down all 14 photographs in 40 minutes. I worked quickly because working quickly made it feel like efficiency rather than what it actually was. I wrapped them in a moving blanket. I put them in the garage behind a shelf. I vacuumed the living room, lit one of Nicole's candles, and stood in the middle of the bare walls and felt something I identified in the moment as discomfort and that I now understand was my conscience trying to reach me before the damage became permanent. I did not listen to it. I went to work. Nicole moved in that weekend. She walked through the apartment and said it felt like a home now. She said she was happy. She unpacked her things into the bedroom. She arranged her own photographs on the shelves, photographs of her family, her friends, her life before us, and the shelves that had held Rachel's things now held Nicole's things, and I told myself this was what moving forward looked like. Lily came home on Monday and stood in the doorway and said, "You took Mom down." I said Nicole needed the space to feel like hers too. Lily looked at me for a long moment and said, "Did you tell her no?" I said it was complicated. She said, "Did you tell her no, Dad?" I said Nicole had real feelings about this and we needed to respect them. Lily said, "What about our feelings?" I did not have an answer. She went to her room. I heard her lock the door, which she had never done before, and the sound of that lock was the sound of something closing that had been open my entire relationship with my daughter. Evan found out that night. Lily told him. I heard them through the wall, her voice and then his, and then a silence, and then Evan knocked on my bedroom door where Nicole and I were and he opened it without waiting and he looked at Nicole and he said, "Did you make him take Mom down?" Nicole said it was a complicated situation. Evan said, "Did you ask him too?" Nicole said she had some feelings about the photographs and that adults sometimes had to make difficult decisions. Evan looked at her for a moment with the look of a 9-year-old who has just received the answer he was looking for inside the answer he was given. He turned to me and said, "You should have said no." Then he went back to his room. I should have said no. I lay in bed that night next to Nicole and stared at the ceiling and thought about Evan's 2 words at the kitchen table. "Please don't." And about Lily's question, "Did you tell her no?" And about the lock on Lily's door. And about 14 photographs in a garage wrapped in a moving blanket while 2 children slept 20 feet away from the empty walls where their mother used to be. I had told myself the children would adjust. I had told myself Nicole's discomfort was reasonable. I had told myself this was what blended families required. I had built a scaffolding of justification around a decision I had known was wrong from the moment it was asked of me, and I had stood inside that scaffolding and let it hold me up and called it forward movement. Nicole was asleep. I got out of bed. I went to the living room and sat in the dark and looked at the bare walls, and I stayed there until 3 in the morning when I heard a sound from the hallway. Lily was standing outside Evan's room. She had a photograph in her hands. The beach one, the one she had chosen herself, the one of Rachel and both children mid-laugh. She had gone to the garage in the dark and found it. She was 12 years old and it was 3 in the morning and she had gone to the garage to find her mother because her mother was not on the walls anymore. She did not see me at first. When she did not say anything. She just held the photograph and looked at me. And I looked at my daughter in the hallway at 3 in the morning holding her mother's photograph that she had retrieved from a garage because I had put it there, and I understood, fully and without any remaining room for justification, exactly what I had done. I said her name. She said, "I just wanted to see her." I said I knew. She went back to her room with the photograph and closed the door, and I sat in the living room until morning and waited for the sun to come up on the worst decision I had ever made. Nicole found the photograph the next morning. Lily had left it on her nightstand and her door was open, and Nicole walked past and saw it and came to me in the kitchen and said, "One of them went to the garage." Not, "Are the kids okay?" Not, "I understand why she did that." She said, "We had an agreement." I put down my coffee and I looked at her, and something that had been under pressure for weeks released in a way that was quiet and complete and irreversible. I said, "She is 12 years old and she went to the garage in the middle of the night to find a photograph of her mother that I put there because you asked me to." Nicole said she understood it was difficult. I said, "I don't think you do." She said she needed me to talk to Lily about boundaries. I said, "I am not talking to my daughter about boundaries around her mother's photograph." Nicole said this was exactly the kind of pushback she had been worried about, that she had been clear about what she needed and I had agreed, and now I was letting the children undermine the agreement. She said the word undermine about my grieving children retrieving a photograph of their dead mother from a garage. That word. Undermine. I said, "I need you to hear what you just said." She said she stood by it. I said, "You asked me to put photographs of their mother in a garage. My daughter is 12. My son is 9. Their mother has been dead for 3 years. And you used the word undermine." Nicole said I was being dramatic. I said I was being accurate. She said if I was not going to support the boundaries of our shared space, she did not know how this was going to work. I said, "I think that might be the right question." She looked at me with an expression that recalibrated several times in a few seconds, and then she said, "Are you serious right now?" I said, "I'm going to get the photographs." I went to the garage. I got all 14. I carried them into the living room and I started rehanging them. Nicole came in and watched me. She said, "If you do this, I am not sure I can stay here." I put Rachel's wedding photograph back above the television first. I said, "I know." She said, "You are choosing them over me." I put the hospital photograph back, Evan's choice, Rachel holding him an hour after he was born. I said, "Yes." She said my name in the voice of someone who has not yet accepted that a conversation is over. I put the beach photograph back, the one Lily had carried to the garage in the dark, and I straightened it against the wall and I turned around and I said, "I should have said this when you first asked. These photographs are not a transition period item. They are not a blended family adjustment strategy. They are my children's mother and she lives on these walls and she will live on these walls for as long as my children live in this home. If that is something you cannot accept, then this is not the home for you." Nicole looked at the walls and then at me and she said, "I can't believe you're doing this." I said, "I can't believe it took me this long." She went to the bedroom. I heard her on the phone. I sat in the living room with Rachel back on the walls and I waited. Lily came out of her room, saw the photographs, stopped. She looked at the beach photograph, the one that had been in her hands at 3 in the morning. She looked at me. I said, "They are staying up. They are not coming down again." I am sorry it took me this long to say that. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "Did you tell her no?" I said, "Yes." She nodded. She went to the kitchen and poured herself cereal and sat at the table and ate it, and that was the most normal thing that had happened in the apartment in weeks. Evan appeared 10 minutes later. He saw the photographs. He saw Lily eating cereal. He looked at me and said, "Are they staying?" I said yes. He said, "For real?" I said for real. He climbed onto the couch next to me and leaned against my arm, and we sat there while Lily finished her cereal, and somewhere in the bedroom Nicole was on the phone and the walls had Rachel back on them and the apartment felt like itself again for the first time since the Saturday morning I had dismantled it. Nicole came out of the bedroom 2 hours later with a bag. She said she needed some space to think. I said I understood. She said she hoped I understood what I was giving up. I said I understood what I had almost given up, which was different. She left. The children watched her go from the hallway, and when the door closed Evan said, "Is she coming back?" I said I did not think so. He said, "Okay." Lily said nothing. She went back to her room and I heard her door, but this time I did not hear the lock. Nicole called that evening. She said she had been thinking and that she was willing to work on it if I was willing to meet her halfway. I said I did not think there was a halfway available. She said I was being inflexible. I said I was being clear, which I had not been clear enough before, and that the clarity was going to stay. She said she had given 7 months to this relationship and to those children. I said I appreciated that. I said the relationship was over. She said I was making a mistake. I said I had already made the mistake and I was correcting it. She did not call again. I told the children the following morning that Nicole would not be living with us. Lily said, "Because of the photographs?" I said because of a lot of things, and the photographs were part of it. Evan said, "She didn't like Mom's pictures." I said some people found it difficult to share space with memories that were not theirs. Evan thought about that and said, "That's sad for her." He meant it genuinely, with the specific uncomplicated empathy of a 9-year-old, and the sentence stopped me because he was right. It was sad for Nicole. She had wanted something she was not able to hold, and she had asked for a version of our home that we were not able to give her, and the ending was a loss for everyone, including her. I had not thought of it that way before. Evan was 9 and he had found the generous version without trying. I called Rachel's mother that week. I had not spoken to her properly since before Nicole moved in. She had heard things from Lily, who called her grandmother regularly, and she had been waiting for me to call rather than calling me, which was its own form of restraint that I understood and was grateful for. I told her what had happened, the full version, the photographs in the garage and the lock on Lily's door and Lily in the hallway at 3 in the morning and Nicole and the word undermine and the rehanging. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Rachel would be glad you got there." Not that I had gotten there quickly. That I had gotten there. The distinction was important and she knew it was important and she said it anyway. The apartment settled back into itself over the following weeks. The children settled. Not immediately, not without the residue of what had happened, but progressively, in the specific way of children who are resilient not because the difficult thing did not affect them but because the difficult thing was addressed and the addressing gave them somewhere to put it. Lily came to me 3 weeks after Nicole left and said she wanted to talk about something. I said okay. She said she needed to know that it would not happen again, that if I brought someone into the home again it would not happen again. I said I needed her to know the same thing. I said I had made a serious mistake and I was not going to pretend it was smaller than it was. She said, "I know why you did it." I said, "Tell me." She said, "You were lonely and she made you feel less lonely and you were scared if you said no she would leave." I said yes. She said, "That's the same reason I didn't say more when you first told me. I didn't want you to be lonely either." I sat with that for a moment. 12 years old. She had been holding space for my loneliness while carrying her own grief and watching me dismantle her mother's presence from the walls. She had been protecting me while I was failing to protect her. I held her for a long time after that. She let me hold her. The lock on her door was never used again. I went to therapy. I am still in therapy. I am working on the specific failure that led to that Saturday morning, the loneliness that made me available to a demand I should have refused immediately, the fear that made me wrap 14 photographs in a moving blanket and put them in a garage rather than have a difficult conversation. The therapist says the fear was real and understandable and also not a justification, and that the work is to understand the fear well enough that the next time it arrives I can see it clearly instead of agreeing to things I know are wrong in order to make it quieter. I am doing the work. It is slow. It is necessary. The photographs are on the walls. They have been on the walls since the morning I rehung them and they will remain on the walls for as long as this is the home where Rachel's children live. Lily straightened the beach one last week, the same way she had straightened it when it first went up, with the specific attention of someone maintaining something that matters. I watched her do it and I thought about her at 3 in the morning in the hallway, the photograph in her hands, retrieved from the garage in the dark because her mother was not on the walls and she had needed to see her. She should never have had to do that. I should have said no the first time Nicole asked. Not eventually. Not after a lock on my daughter's door and a 9-year-old's 2 words and a 12-year-old in a hallway at 3 in the morning. The first time. Before the moving blanket. Before the garage. Before any of it. I should have looked at the person asking me to make my children's grief invisible for her comfort, and I should have said clearly, from the very first conversation, that this was not something I was able to do. That was the answer. That was always the only answer. And I found it 6 weeks and 14 photographs and 1 lock and 1 hallway and 1 please don't and 1 did you tell her no too late. If you are reading this from inside a similar moment, if someone is asking you to make your children's grief smaller, to move their memories to accommodate someone else's comfort, to put their mother in a garage because the presence of her makes someone else feel like a guest, I want to say one thing to you, and I want to say it in the plainest possible language. Say no. Say it the first time. Say it before your daughter goes to the garage in the dark. Say it before your son says please don't at the kitchen table. Say it before the lock. Your children's grief is not a transition period item. Their mother is not a blended family adjustment strategy. And the person who asks you to choose between her comfort and their mother's place on the walls has already told you everything you need to know. Say no. Before you find out what yes costs. I know what yes costs. I hear it every time I pass the beach photograph on the wall. The one my daughter carried through the dark to find. Because I had put her mother in the garage. Say no.